Like no other route, the Silk Road brought different cultures together. Because of its positive effects on trade, the economy, and society as a whole, historians consider the route to be influential. Today in this video, we'll have a look into the Silk Road's connection to sex and intimacy, a component that receives less attention than others. The Silk Road was a network of markets and trading posts throughout Asia and the Indian Ocean basin that extended from the eastern Mediterranean to the interior of China, and it earned its name thanks to the most valuable commodity on the route, silk. Because of the large number of travelers making their way down the road, the different cultures that came into contact on the route, and the luxury goods that were being exchanged, intimacy on the historical Silk Road was an interesting, complicated, and nuanced cluster of encounters. A brief look into the history of the Silk Road. Even though silk had been traded for many years, the Han Dynasty in China only formally opened up its trade with the West in 130 BCE. Roman and Han contacts, as well as other tribes in between, allowed for extensive commercial and cultural exchange. The Silk Road was used for more than 1,500 years, with varying degrees of popularity, reaching its zenith during the 13th and 14th centuries under the Mongols. Rarely did the merchants, diplomats, travelers, and missionaries who used the Silk Road travel the entire path. Instead, they took part in a relay system. Naturally, these people, mostly men, coped on the Silk Road. But throughout the vast geographic area and protracted period that it was in use, attitudes about cohabitation, sexuality, and gender changed. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because there was a lot of influence and interaction that improved such concepts. Let's dive into some of the interesting facts about the sexual lives of the nomads. The Silk Road and Love and Sex by Marco Polo. The fame of Marco Polo stems from his journeys around Asia at the height of the Mongol Empire. Because he wrote down so many of his experiences, his travelogue is still one of the best resources on travel and trade during this time. His writings contain a wealth of information on life on the Silk Road, including references to some sex and romantic relationships. Polo made the most overt reference to sexual intercourse when he described how people along the Silk Road opened their homes to visitors in need of respite. Was human trafficking a norm? Yes, you heard it right. Workers and sexual slaves bookended the road. Roman attitudes toward slaves, sex workers, and concubines were not always clear, and male masters and female slaves frequently engaged in intimate encounters. Despite the modest Byzantine temperament, women in the Byzantine Empire sold themselves into sex labor to survive, and copulation was a common concern. Due to the significance of silk in the Byzantine Empire, Byzantine traders traveled along the Silk Road and interacted with other traders frequently. The empire, the westernmost point of the road, was littered with cat houses. Did the wives used to sleep with the guests? Roadside hosts allow guests to stay with their wives. According to Marco Polo, when tourists slept at a stranger's home, the host was frequently amenable to letting the guest share his wife. Despite the Mongols' apparent displeasure with this behavior, they decided to leave the men to their shame and naughty custom. When a tourist arrives, the host is overjoyed and asks his wife to devote herself totally to the visitor's needs, while he steps aside and doesn't return until the stranger has left. While the husband feels no shame about it and even considers it an honor, the guest is welcome to stay and enjoy the wife's company for as long as he likes. And in this way, the wives of every man in these provinces made fun of them. We might assume that the women were also lovely and lustful in their own right. Was homosexuality common? There were many same-sex relationships. Roman influences were very strong throughout the early Silk Road, especially on the western end. As a result, part of the length of Roman conceptions of same-sex relationships was increased. Although there is a long and colorful history of male friendship in the Mediterranean, historians have discovered that the Mongols also practiced homosexuality in China and the Russian Khanates. It's impossible to determine whether or not Genghis Khan, whose real name was Temujin, slept with other men while they were covered up, although there are reports of him doing so. Despite this, The Mongol realm had a strong Islamic influence which viewed homosexuality as an unsuitable topic in polite society, but still accepted relationships between people of the same gender as part of one's private life. Now this is something very confusing. Intimate behavior along the road. The genetic code and legacy of Genghis Khan are legendary. He is supposed to have around 16 million mathematical descendants, which makes sense given the use of women as loot at the time he lived. Copulation is emphasized by Genghis Khan and his carnal behavior as a means of displaying authority and, in a sense, leaving one's mark. Marco Polo also spoke of the Khan's custom of seizing any attractive woman for himself. Women were also sent to Kublai Khan, the son of Genghis, by tribes in the Yuan dynasty. Sex and political power. Eunuchs were frequently used as ambassadors and court officials by the late Roman and Byzantine empires, as well as by Chinese dynastic emperors, in part because of their condition. A castrated eunuch might be in high demand among traders in both empires. Eunuchs frequently earned prestige and significance in social and political settings because they were seen as neutral and harmless males. Similar to how they were perceived as non-threats in China, eunuchs gained access to the highest and closest circles of the royal court. Famous Chinese explorer Zheng He utilized his connections and power to spread Chinese dynastic control along the Silk Road. The kidnapping and exchange of women. By using both force and diplomacy, the Silk Road provided a route for the transportation of women throughout Asia. The role of women along the Silk Road is highlighted in the Wenji narrative. Wenji was taken prisoner in the 2nd century, brought along the road, and made to wed a warlord from a nomadic tribe before being freed. After being saved, Wenji lamented the loss of her nomadic family because she had 2 children with the man. Medicinal intimacy and sex. Intimacy was seen to be natural, useful, and therapeutic in ancient China. Medical books describe appropriate and inappropriate sexual behavior, habits that persisted throughout the ups and downs of the time that the Silk Road was in use. The classic of The White Girl, a Tang Dynasty treatise, gives guidance to males on making love. It emphasizes the significance of the act for human health and the environment. Travelers may have been offered women too. In Turfan, a region of China through which traders traveled, agreements were made with residents and officials for services like interpreting and travel authorizations. According to Turfan's official records, women were present at the market as well as may have been provided as part of a contractual arrangement to males who were residing along the road. Female slaves could also be purchased from merchants, and the new owner was free to treat the slave however he pleased, including beating, tying her up, selling her, holding her hostage, and giving her as a gift. Although copulation isn't mentioned precisely, it is stated that the buyer is free to do anything he wants with her. The spread of sexual and how-to manuals on the Silk Road. Through the Silk Road, many concepts about intimacy and sex spread throughout society. For instance, ecstasy was thought to be the key to enlightenment in Tantric Buddhism, a subset of Buddhism. Along the Silk Road, this school of Buddhism's teachings spread, including the notion that ecstasy could be attained through sexual rituals. The renowned Kama Sutra, which was written in the 3rd or 4th century AD, was also widely distributed along the Silk Road. This book is a handbook for having intimate relationships. These relationships were portrayed as social and financial obligations. Kama, which means pleasure in Sanskrit, suggests that pleasure was also somewhat the purpose. The bottom line. In conclusion, the Silk Road enabled a variety of sexual behaviors and interactions, both close and far. Along with engaging in sexual activity, travelers on the Silk Road also passed along notions about sex from one culture to another through oral tradition sharing, written how-to manuals, or both. This winds up our history lesson for today. What are your thoughts on sexual encounters on the Silk Road? Tell us in the comments. Also, like, share, and subscribe to the channel to see more videos.
Much like no other pathway, the Silk Road facilitated the convergence of diverse cultures. Historians acknowledge its significant impact on trade, the economy, and society in general. These distinct cultures had a remarkable influence on intimate interactions and closeness in a unique manner. Prepare to be astonished by the kidnapping and trade of women. The Silk Road was an intricate network of marketplaces and trading outposts spanning Asia and the Indian Ocean basin. It stretched from the eastern Mediterranean to the heart of China, and its name was derived from its most prized commodity, silk. Given the considerable volume of travelers traversing this route, the encounters between various cultures, and the exchange of luxurious goods gave rise to intriguing, intricate, and multifaceted instances of intimacy along the historical Silk Road. A brief glimpse into Silk Road history. Despite silk trade existing for numerous years, the formal opening of trade between the Han Dynasty in China and the Western world occurred in 130 BCE. Contacts between the Roman Empire, the Han Dynasty, and the diverse tribes in between fostered extensive commercial and cultural interchange. The Silk Road remained in use for over 1,500 years, experiencing fluctuating levels of popularity, reaching its zenith during the 13th and 14th centuries under Mongol rule. It was rare for merchants, diplomats, travelers, and missionaries who utilized the Silk Road to traverse its entire length. They instead participated in a relay system. Naturally, these individuals, predominantly men, encountered varied situations along the Silk Road. However, across the extensive geographical expanse and extended duration of its use, attitudes toward cohabitation, intimacy, and gender underwent transformations. This evolution was not necessarily negative, as it resulted from significant influence and interaction that contributed to enhancing these concepts. Now, let us explore intriguing details concerning the romantic lives of the nomads. The Silk Road and love and intimacy, as recorded by Marco Polo. The renown of Marco Polo emanates from his extensive travels across Asia during the zenith of the Mongol Empire. His documentation of experiences serves as a valuable resource on travel and trade during that era. Polo's accounts provide abundant insights into life along the Silk Road, including references to romantic and intimate relationships. Polo's most explicit reference to intimate relations is seen when he describes how people along the Silk Road would offer their homes to weary travelers seeking respite. Was abduction of individuals commonplace? Indeed, astonishing as it may seem, the transportation of laborers and enslaved individuals was prevalent. The Silk Road saw the movement of both workers and individuals subjected to sexual enslavement. Roman perspectives on slaves, sex workers, and concubines were not always clear-cut, leading to instances where male masters and female slaves engaged in intimate liaisons. Despite the Byzantine Empire's relatively conservative nature, women within it sometimes resorted to engaging in sex work for survival, and intimate relations were a prevailing concern. Given the prominence of silk in the Byzantine Empire, Byzantine traders frequently traversed the Silk Road, interacting with other traders along the way. The empire, situated at the westernmost point of the Silk Road, was marked by the presence of establishments offering sexual services. Did the wives used to sleep with the guests? In a distinctive practice, hosts along the roadside would extend hospitality by allowing guests to stay with their wives. According to Marco Polo, when travelers sought shelter in the home of a stranger, the host would often permit the guest to share his wife's company. Despite the apparent disapproval of such behavior by the Mongols, they chose to overlook it, attributing it to the host's misguided custom. Upon the arrival of a guest, the host would rejoice and ask his wife to dedicate herself entirely to attending to the visitor's needs. The husband would step aside and only return once the guest had departed. While the husband perceived no shame in this arrangement and even considered it an honor, the guest was invited to remain and enjoy the wife's companionship for as long as desired. Consequently, the wives of the men in this region would jest about them in this regard. Was homosexuality common? Indeed, instances of same-sex relationships were notable. Roman influences wielded considerable influence along the early Silk Road, particularly at its western end. Consequently, certain aspects of Roman perspectives on same-sex relationships permeated along the route. While the Mediterranean region had a rich tradition of male friendship, historians have uncovered indications of homosexuality among the Mongols in China and the Russian Khanate. While precise details about Genghis Khan's private life remain elusive, there are reports suggesting his involvement in such relationships. The Mongol realm, however, was significantly influenced by Islamic values, which considered discussions of homosexuality inappropriate in polite society but acknowledged same-sex relationships as a component of private life. This complexity lends a puzzling aspect to the matter. Was there any intimate behavior along the road? The genetic legacy of Genghis Khan is legendary, with estimates suggesting he has around 16 million direct descendants due to the practice of taking women as spoils during his time. Genghis Khan emphasized copulation and his carnal behavior as a demonstration of authority and a way of leaving his mark. Marco Polo also described the Khan's tendency to claim attractive women for himself. Tribes in the Yuan dynasty sent women to Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's son. What about intimacy and political influence? Eunuchs, individuals who had been castrated, frequently served as ambassadors and court officials in both the late Roman and Byzantine empires, as well as in Chinese dynastic empires. Their neutered status made them sought after in trade settings in both empires. Eunuchs often attained prestige and held significant positions in social and political realms due to their perceived neutrality and harmlessness. Similarly, in China, they gained access to the highest echelons of the royal court. The renowned Chinese explorer Zheng He utilized his influence to propagate Chinese dynastic authority along the Silk Road. The kidnapping and exchange of women. The Silk Road facilitated the transportation of women across Asia through a combination of force and diplomacy. The story of Wenji highlights the role of women along the Silk Road. Wenji, taken captive in the 2nd century, was transported along the route, compelled into marriage with a warlord from a nomadic tribe, and subsequently liberated. Following her rescue, Wenji mourned the separation from her nomadic family, as she had borne 2 children during her time with the warlord. Intimate matters as medicinal practices. In ancient China, intimacy was perceived as natural, beneficial, and even therapeutic. Medical texts detailed appropriate and inappropriate sexual behaviors, customs that endured throughout the varying periods of Silk Road usage. The Tang Dynasty treatise, Classic of the White Girl, offered guidance to men on matters of love, underscoring the significance of these acts for human well-being and the environment. Travelers may have been offered women too. In Turfan, a region of China traversed by traders, agreements were forged with local residents and officials for services like interpretation and travel permissions. Records from Turfan suggest that women were present at markets and might have been provided as part of contractual arrangements to men residing along the Silk Road. Female slaves could also be procured from merchants, and the new owner possessed the authority to treat the slave as they saw fit, including physical abuse, captivity, sale, or gifting. While the act of copulation is not explicitly mentioned, the buyer was afforded the liberty to exercise control in any manner they desired. The spread of intimacy and how-to manuals on the Silk Road. The Silk Road played a role in disseminating various notions about intimacy and sex throughout societies. For instance, Tantric Buddhism, a subset of Buddhism, held the belief that ecstasy was a pathway to enlightenment. This teaching of Tantric Buddhism spread along the Silk Road, encompassing the idea that ecstasy could be achieved through sexual rituals. Furthermore, the renowned Kama Sutra, authored in the 3rd or 4th century AD, enjoyed widespread distribution along the Silk Road. This text served as a guidebook for intimate relationships, portraying such relationships as social and financial obligations. The term kama, which signifies pleasure in Sanskrit, implies that pleasure was a central element.